Last week we read Revelation chapter 6, and in that chapter Jesus loosed 6 of the 7 seals of the scroll containing the destiny of the world. As each seal was loosed, an aspect of chaos that will occur during the final period of tribulation was unveiled. And in light of the turmoil that will be present on earth, it is reasonable to wonder what will happen to God's people during that time. And this question begins to be answered in chapter 7, verses 1 to 8, which we will read now. After these things, I saw, and I there is John, the author of the book of Revelation, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, Do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed. 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Asher, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. Can we thank God for his word? Aren't you glad we're not going through the book of Numbers? And I was reading very long lists to you. But that was only 8 verses. And in this passage, we are told that God's servants will be sealed before certain future calamities will be allowed to begin. Now, we must remember that the book of Revelation is a very symbolic book. And I want to mention and explain 3 symbols that appear in this passage. First of all, there is the symbol of the seal. Second, the symbol of the 144,000, and then the symbol of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, the seal is a symbol of protection, and it's a seal of protection from the direct judgments of God. Now, in Ezekiel chapter 9, the righteous were marked on their foreheads, which gave them protection from the impending judgment. And similarly, God's servants will be marked with a seal of protection during this future period. It should be noted that this seal is not a protection from natural death or from persecution or from all misfortune. It is specifically a seal related to the direct judgments of God during the future period described in Revelation. So that's what the seal is. And we will be told later on in the book of Revelation that people are explicitly protected from the 5th trumpet judgment who have this seal on them. But let's move on now to the second symbol, namely the number 144,000. And that's a symbol representing all of God's servants. 12 is the number of God's people. You have the 12 tribes of Israel, and you have the 12 apostles of Jesus. And if you take 12, multiply it by 12,000, you get 144,000. This is a symbolic number. And all of God's servants, that's who is represented by this symbolic number, all of God's servants will receive this seal of protection during this future period of intense difficulty before Jesus returns. Now let's now look at the third symbol, namely the 12 tribes of Israel mentioned in the passage. They are a symbol which represents the church as the new Israel. And this is very important. You will remember what we have covered leading up to this moment in the book. We recall Jesus talking about those who say they are Jews and are not. What an interesting thing for a Jewish Messiah to say. He speaks of those who say they are Jews and are not, and that was earlier in this series through Revelation. Now, did you notice that when John listed the 12 tribes in this passage, that one of the tribes was missing? See, it's important to not fall asleep when you go through lists. One of the tribes was missing. He did not mention the tribe of Dan. How interesting. So the 12 tribes which were mentioned were Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. But Dan is not there. And so this cannot literally be the 12 tribes of Israel, because it literally isn't. One of them is missing, namely Dan. Now, by way of background, Jacob, who his name was later changed to Israel, he had 12 sons, and from those sons came the 12 tribes of Israel. The tribe of Levi was separated from the other 11 tribes to look after the tabernacle, and that left 11 tribes. And so to bring the number back to 12, the tribe of Joseph was split into 2 tribes, namely the tribe of Manasseh and the tribe of Ephraim. They were the 2 sons of Jacob. So his tribe was split into 2, and so the 12 tribes didn't include Levi because he was separated from the others. Now, in John's list, here's what's interesting. Levi is included, but Dan is not. Very interesting. Now, I wonder if that reminds you of something. Is not the church founded on 12 apostles, one of whom has been replaced? Judas fell and was replaced by Matthias. And here we have 12 tribes listed, but one of them has been replaced. The tribe of Dan has been replaced with Levi. And so these 12 tribes are a symbol of the church, which is the new Israel, founded upon 12 apostles, one of whom has been replaced. And so we have to pay careful attention to the details if we're going to get the hints that are being given to us regarding what's going on. And it's because the church is the new Israel that Paul can say in Romans 2:28 to 29, "For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not from men, but from God." And so we see that we are Jews, because a Jew is one who is a Jew inwardly, who has circumcision of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter. Circumcision being that all-important rite in the Old Covenant that every Israelite had to receive, every male Israelite at the age of 8 days old. And so in Galatians 3:29, Paul says, and if you are Christ's, are you Christ's? Then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So every one of us who believes in Jesus, who belongs to him, we are descendants of Abraham. I hope you include him in your family history. You are a descendant of Abraham spiritually. And then in verse 7 of the same chapter, Galatians 3, it says, therefore, watch this closely, know that only those who are of faith are sons of Abraham. Now that's interesting. It implies that physical descendants of Abraham who do not have faith in the Messiah, according to Paul, and he's a Jew, he says they're not sons of Abraham. Only those who are of faith, he says, are counted as Abraham's sons. And so, in the last verse of Galatians, Paul addresses the church as the Israel of God. In chapter 6:16 of the book of Galatians, peace and mercy to all who follow this rule, to the Israel of God. And so it is we who believe in Jesus who are the true sons of Abraham and therefore the new Israel. And if I were going beyond the 8 verses we are considering, and when we get to it probably next week, we will see yet again that John, he basically is given this vision, and we'll look at that next week, and it's of people from all nations basically, and then he speaks about how Jesus will shepherd them and lead them. And what he's doing then, we'll look at this next week, he's quoting from the book of Isaiah. It was a promise given to Israel, and it was a prophecy about Israel's restoration. And the book of Revelation takes that prophecy, which is for Israel, the nation, and their restoration, and says, basically, it applies it to the church. And it sees the fulfillment of that prophecy in the church. And that is a theme throughout the New Testament. And I've done a teaching on that some time ago, back in lockdown on Zoom, where we looked in depth at various prophecies in the Old Testament that were about Israel's restoration after they come back from exile. And those same prophecies in the New Testament are said to be fulfilled, or they are applied to the church. And so this notion of the church as spiritual Israel is really important. It's so important. Whenever you read the New Testament and it quotes from the Old Testament, if you really want to understand what the author is saying, look up the passage in the Old Testament and see what it was saying there. And then when you begin to now see how it's applied in the New Testament, you begin to understand God's program a lot better. So then, why does John in Revelation want us to think of the church as the new Israel? What's the point in going to all this trouble to tell us this, to tell us that we will all be sealed who are true servants of God? And there is more to who these 144,000 are later on in the book of Revelation in chapter 14, and we will come to that when we get to that chapter. But why does John want us to think of the church as the new Israel? The answer is simply this: he wants us to be reminded of Israel's exodus from Egypt. Now, this becomes kind of a thing in the book of Revelation, this theme of the Exodus. Because as we read this book of Revelation, we will note that some of the judgments that will be described are reminiscent of God's judgments on Egypt before he brought the Israelites out of Egypt. And in fact, I'll jump a bit ahead of myself here, but in chapter 14 of the book of Revelation, John sees the 144,000 again, and he sees them standing on a sea of glass mingled with fire, which perhaps reminds us of the Red Sea, and it says they are singing the Song of Moses. What an interesting thing to say, the Song of Moses. And what that is alluding to is Exodus chapter 15, where after the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, we read about Moses and Israel singing this song to God. And so this theme of the Exodus is something that appears in this book of Revelation. And so John wants us to know that even as God brought his people victoriously out of Egypt, so he will bring the church victoriously out of this present evil age. And even as Israel thereafter inherited their promised land, so Jesus will lead his new Israel to inherit the heavenly Jerusalem, which John will describe in Revelation chapter 21 and 22. Now, by the way, when John is told the dimensions of the New Jerusalem, and I hope that we are all looking forward to the New Jerusalem, that is our hope, that is where we are all going to be. Now, when he is told the dimensions of the New Jerusalem, the width, the length, and the height are each 12,000 furlongs. Now, does the number 12,000 ring a bell? 12,000 from each tribe. And the thickness of the wall, he says, or he's told, is 144 cubits. That's about 65 meters. So thick walls. Now, notice that. Does that number, 144, ring a bell? Of course it does. 144,000. And so, basically, these are symbolic numbers that identify us as citizens of the new heavenly Jerusalem. All right, so there's a lot of symbolism going on here, and we need to pay attention to the details as we read this book. So, as we go through this book of Revelation, let us not read it in fear. For if God will cause the horrors to happen, he will also cause the seals to happen too, the sealing. And by the way, just so we know, I appreciate today we don't really use seals in our everyday life, but a seal back then was usually made from maybe hard stone or metal, and it had a distinctive image on it which would be impressed on an object, and that was like a sign that you owned that object. And so God knows those who are his. Be more confident in God's knowledge of you than your knowledge of him. He knows that you are his more than you know that you belong to him. Because sometimes in life things will happen. We're not always in the best of moods. Stuff can go on and we cannot feel like a child of God. But God knows that you are his. You know who your children are. God knows who his children are. And we know that our God is faithful to do what he said he will do. And so that's where I'm concluding this message today, a very short one, much shorter than my 50-minute rant last week, which I cut down in size online. But a nice short message today, but very simple. And I hope you remember that you are the seed of Abraham. So let me summarize this message, or at least summarize what I plan to say to you in this message. First of all of God's servants will be protected from God's direct judgments during the future period described in Revelation. This does not mean protection from natural death, from persecution, or from all misfortune. It is specifically related to the direct judgments of God. The number 144,000 is a symbol representing all of God's servants. The church is the new Israel. And before I read the rest, let me quickly say to you, the fact that we are the new Israel doesn't mean God doesn't have a plan for ethnic Israel. But it does mean that in order for ethnic Israel to fulfill their destiny, they will have to become part of the new Israel. That's God's plan. And the book of Ephesians is very clear. that Jesus has removed the wall of hostility between the two, between Jew and Gentile, and he has made both in Christ to be one new man. And we need to be very careful. We need to distinguish between true Christianity and political Christianity. Because if a lot of people understood that the church was the new Israel, they wouldn't be supporting things in the Middle East that they shouldn't support. If the nation of Israel does something wrong, it's wrong. If the Palestinians do something wrong, it's wrong. Our priority is God's name being hallowed, not taking sides. Because all of this stuff about us being the new Israel, the church, made up of Jew and Gentile who believe in Jesus, all of that is told us by Jews, Jewish believers, the apostles, and Jesus himself. The book of Revelation describes God's judgments which will precede our exodus from this present evil age. The book of Revelation also describes our promised land, a new heavenly Jerusalem. We should not read the book of Revelation in fear. If God will cause the horrors to happen, he will also cause the sealing of his servants to happen too.